Welcome, welcome. We'll take a moment as we allow everybody to load into the webinar this morning. We're so happy that you're all here. Today is webinar number 5 of 6. We will round out the final webinar this Friday. For many of you that have been with us since the launch of the first webinar, we hope that you have found it of value. I know I mentioned last week that these webinars aren't your average grant writing sessions. We've really taken them a step beyond the actual writing of the application. And we've brought in some professional development and mentorship from our consultants in the HR area, legal, finance, marketing, branding. So we're hoping that all of our friends are bringing you excellent information that is helping you not only to prepare for your grant, but potentially preparing you to become a successful grantee on the other side as well. For those of you that I don't know, my name is Andrea Hansen. I am the Executive Director of the Kern Dance Alliance, and I am the Program Director of the KDA Creative Corps. Today, we are talking all about adopting finance and budget management. We're joined by Danette Wolf, who is the KDA Creative Corps Bookkeeper, as well as Charlie McCarthy, the KDA Creative Corps Accountant, and Edith Cazares, who is our representative from Mission Bank, who is helping to keep all of our finances very safe. We're also joined today by our friend Stephanie, who is bringing you ASL translation services. If you are in need of those services, please click the ASL translation button, and that will be available for you. Additionally, today's session is being recorded, and it will be available to you later in a couple of days. Just give it some time to package up that recording and get it online. We will also be hosting a Q&A session, so I will go ahead and share my screen with today's plan for our agenda. Give me one moment. So today's agenda will, like I said, be covering developing a Creative Corps budget and adopting finance management. We have Danette, Charlie, and Edith with us, all experts in the field, to share their information with you. We will start with the bookkeeping element. Danette will be walking you through how to craft a strong budget on behalf of your project. From there, we'll move on over to Charlie, who's going to be giving you information about tax filings, whether you are an individual or an organization. This information is excellent for everybody. Then we'll wrap up with Edith, who will be talking all about safe banking practices and tools that you can use to manage your finances in the banking realm. From there, we will then move into the Q&A and the wrap-up. So I want to encourage you to drop all of your questions into the Q&A. I will be here today moderating that for you, and just continue to keep them going. And towards the end, we will moderate those and certainly save enough time to get all of your questions answered. So with that said, it is my esteemed pleasure to introduce to you Danette Wolf, who is the KDA Creative Corps Bookkeeper. Danette, the floor is yours. Feel free to unmute, and you have the floor.
Thank you, Andrea, and thank you for the reminder about unmuting. I am a professional bookkeeper, and I'm pleased to be working with the KDA Creative Corps and KDA and everyone else that's involved with this wonderful organization. The first thing I'd like to let you know is I was raised on the KISS principle. And that is keep it simple, stupid. And I apologize for the word stupid, but that's the way it was raised and used. But the main thing is to keep it simple. And so when I talk to you about the bookkeeping side of it, I want you to remember that you have income and then you have expenses. So you have the plus and then you have the minus. You need to be focused on your numbers. Okay, so you can't overdraw your bank account because Edith will let you know what happens when you do that. So we have several financial tools that you can use. A couple of free ones are pen and paper, You create your T-sheet, you create a debit side and you create a credit side, and you can run your lists from that. That is the most basic, everyday way to do something. The other thing is an Excel spreadsheet, and I'm going to stop for a minute and share my screen. So let's see. Can you see that? How do I do that again? Select a window. There we go. Okay. So I've made a simple little spreadsheet where I've just thrown in some numbers. So don't use these as your actual numbers. But you can see that I have the grant up here under income. And then I have your expenses subtotaled with your artist, 80% going to the artist that you're using. And then down below are admin expenses with just some categories that could be used. You're welcome to put in whatever category or line item that you feel you need for your particular project. At the bottom of this budget, you can see I have the actual column in column B, and that is your actual expenses, income and expenses. And the next to it is the budget. And this is where the information that you receive from David in webinar number 2, you should revisit to put in your budget there. But this is a simple way to line those items up, if that makes sense. So whatever you've referenced in your grant, they must show up here under the artist salaries or wages, whatever you're going to be calling them. And then underneath the admin expenses, we can list all of your different items that you're going to be wanting to put into your grant, but this gives you a picture before you actually fill it into the grant area for your budget. So you can actually see what's going on, and you can use this as 23 and 24, the overall budget. Keep in mind that your grant does not fund the following. Okay, so if you've expenses incurred before the start date or after the ending date of the grant activity period. So if you've already spent some money right now, it doesn't get into your grant funding. Private use, so you can't, purchase a car or pay for gasoline right now or groceries. You cannot purchase equipment, however, you can rent equipment. You can't pay your home loan or any other debt, credit card payments, or anything like that that you did not incur, during this time frame. Hospitality expenses, you can't reimburse for meals or food, even if you're doing a project with your fellow artists and you're gathering information, etc. Those expenses for meals and food and drinks, etc., are not refundable under this grant. And no out-of-state travel. Now, this is only a partial list of, you can go to the grant guidelines and see the full list, talk about how you cannot use things like with the state funded against other state schools, etc. So look at that for that full partial, for the full list. Sorry. This little area over here on my little budget worksheet also does a total calculation of what you've been spending against your salaries and your expenses. The other items about your receipts, you do need to keep copies of your receipts. You can take a photocopy of them, upload them in the Dropbox, depending upon what software you're using. Pen and paper, just staple the receipts to your pen and paper, just so you have them, or throw them in a shoebox, right, Charlie? And then, if you're using a software, there's QuickBooks Online, Xero, FreshBooks. There's all kinds of information out there. You'll just have to do a little homework on it to find out what fits your needs the best. If you don't have the numbers behind you, find somebody who does. Also, you can go to a lot of networking on the internet. You guys are probably pretty technical, so you can search this stuff faster than I can tell it to you. So please look that up. And let's see, I mentioned the receipts, and that's basically what I have, and I'm looking forward to any questions that you guys have in the end of this questionnaire. Thank you.
Thank you, Danette, so much. Very helpful. Again, I cannot reiterate enough that what we do not fund paper that is not only hyperlinked within the grant guidelines, but it's also on the website. If you need that for any reason, you're struggling to find that, please let us know. We're happy to send you the link. And then from here, we're going to go ahead and send it on over to Charlie to chat about our accounting. Charlie, I was getting some notes that there was some, you see me okay? You hear me okay? Yes, sorry, it froze on my end. I was getting some notes that there were some issues with the visuals with the first presentation. So if you're out there and you were seeing some problems with the presentation, please sign into the chat or into the Q&A, and please let me know if you're having a problem with the visuals. So I will go ahead and share screen with Charlie's presentation. Give me one moment. Okay. All right, Charlie, I'll go ahead and go on mute. You can take the floor, and please let me know if anybody's having any issues with the visuals. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Charlie McCarthy, and thank you, Andrea, for being my Vanna today and sharing the screen, so I don't have to do that. So I do have some slides put together. Most of the information I'm going to focus in the beginning is going to be for exempt organizations, so filing requirements that you may have as a 990, but we will get into a little bit if you're an individual, if you have a business, and kind of what the filing requirements for that might look like. So just a little bit about myself. I am a tax partner here at Brown Armstrong. I am a twice graduate of CSUB. I've had, other careers in other lifetimes, but I did find my way to accounting and obviously in tax. And I do specialize and have a niche in the exempt organization world. So there's a brief little summary that Andrea is showing right now about me. And I do have some contact information that we'll see later at the end. So if you have any questions after the fact, even outside of this webinar, feel free, you can reach out to me about that. So we'll kind of jump in on the first slide. And what is a 990? So, and just kind of backtrack a little bit, but if you are an exempt organization, first and foremost, you've organized as a business in the state. So in California, most likely you are a corporation. Second to that, you've applied for exempt status. And so what a 990 is, it's an informational filing. It's not what we would call a traditional tax return filing. So there's a lot of information that goes on here. The series, and I kind of just put a few that of the different 990 forms. So we have what we refer to as the 990. So that's what we call the long form. There's a form 990 EZ. So if you meet certain requirements, you can file the short form. There's a 990 PF. So if you are classified as a private foundation, that's the 990 that you would be filing. There's a what we call a form 990N, which is a postcard filing. So if you meet certain gross receipts requirements, that's the most simplest way to file. And lastly, there is a form 990T. So if you have any unrelated business taxable income, in addition to a 990 EZ, PF, or an N, you may have that 990T filing on top of that. I did put a few of the some due dates because, and my guess is most of you are a calendar year in. So your exempt filings are due the 15th day of the 5th month after year end. So if you're a calendar year in, meaning that you end in December, then your initial due date is May 15th. There is a 6-month extension available. So if you're not able to file by May 15th, then you would be November 15th of that year. The other example that I gave, so if you're a fiscal year filer, a lot of times, and for various reasons, you may, if you're an exempt organization, you might choose that. And the most common one is a June 30 year end. So if you're a June 30th year end, your initial due date would be November 15th of the same year. If you request that 6-month extension, then you would go until May 15th of the following year. So that kind of gives you some ideas about the due dates. Keep in mind that even though you don't pay tax, the whole reason why you do these informational filings is for, the IRS and the state, agencies, they can enforce governance and make sure that you're doing what you're supposed to do. So if you do not file on time, there are, potential late filing penalties, or if you file an incomplete or inaccurate return, you can face penalties for that as well. And if anyone has ran into this previously, I know a lot of exempt organizations used to file themselves, but the IRS actually has an e-file mandate in place. So if you paper file your return, they'll reject it. So you may just need help, finding someone, to help e-file that for you. All right, so we'll go ahead and move on to the next slide. So just some additional information on the, we'll jump in specifically on the long form. So the long form is for your larger tax exempt organizations, and this would be if you have gross receipts of $200,000 or more, or if your total assets are $500,000 or more. If that's the case, then you'll need to file the 990 instead of the EZ. The 990, the core return, is 10 pages long. There are some, and we do have some examples to show you, but there's supplementary schedules regardless of which 990 series you're filing. You have supplementary schedules that go in with that. And just a couple tips, you should keep copies of all your filings. I did put in there what the statute of limitations is. So for California, it's open for 4 years, and for the IRS, it's open for 3 years. So we always recommend that you keep all your records for at least 4 years. Now, there may be various reasons why you want to keep it beyond that, for grant purposes or any other type of, personal reasons that you have, but for tax purposes, these are the recommended time frames. And it also helps if you need to file an amended return or do any type of calculations, you'll have that prior history. Okay, so we'll move on to the next slide. So a little bit more on the long form. You're going to want to make sure that you're keeping good records. So as Danette already mentioned, as far as bookkeeping, it's not just budget and keeping track of what you're doing, but ultimately you're going to have to report that, on your tax return. And so, the better records that you have, the better. And again, if you're going to seek out help, such as an accountant, to prepare that for you, I put some information in here that you would need financial statements. In the nonprofit world, we call this a statement of financial position and a statement of activities, but that's also just known as your balance sheet and your profit and loss, or your income statement. Now, having said that, if you're a larger organization, you might have a professional bookkeeper that's helping you. You may have QuickBooks and you're doing that yourself. Others, you may just simply in an Excel schedule, take your bank statements and say, here's my income, here's my expenses, and, and do it from there. And something that just kind of gets forgotten, since you're getting potentially grant funding for the first time, which is different from just getting a contribution from someone on the street, is that these are you now have what we call restricted net assets. So you want to make sure that you're also doing some net asset tracking. So at the end of the year of your reporting period, if you still have remaining funds from this grant, that those are restricted and are separate from what your unrestricted funds are. So that's a little extra component that, you'll need to make sure that you're keeping track of. All right, we'll move on to the next slide. So now we're just going to kind of talk about the easy, and this is also called the short form. So we have the long form, now we have the short form. So the core return of the 990 EZ is only 4 pages long. So the biggest difference between the long form and the short form is a lot of the non-financial information that gets reported. So when you have the gross receipts between the 50,000 and the 200,000, that's how you qualify to file the EZ, which we call a mid-sized exempt organization. I do like to point out that even if you are under that 50,000, you can elect to file the EZ because you still want that informational filing versus just a postcard. So, and for various reasons, if you're going to apply for future grants or something like that, sometimes they want to see that, versus the postcard. So you can do that. And basically, you're going to use the same financial information. So you're still going to need your balance sheet, your profit and loss, and then that net asset tracking to file the easy as you would the long form. Okay, we'll go ahead and move on. So I think the other most common one is what we call a 990N, which is the e-postcard filing. So this is for exempt organizations whose gross receipts are normally less than 50,000. And I point this out as normally because with getting this grant funding, perhaps let's say you hit 75 this year when normally you're under 50,000. So there is a 3-year look back period for determining that average. So this 1 year may not necessarily throw you out of that filing of that postcard if that's what you still choose to do. So just keep that in mind, that it's not just this year. You use it, counting this year and then the 2 previous years, what is your average? So potentially, you were a postcard filer previously, and because of this, depending on the amount that you get, that may put you over the $50,000. I do want to point out that the IRS, when you file the postcard, you don't actually tell them what your income is. You simply just say, yes, my gross receipts are normally than 50,000. However, if you are a California agency, which you would have to be in order to receive, this funding, California keeps track of it and you actually report your gross receipts to them. So if you tell them, yes, my average is normally less than 50,000, but that's not the average, they will send you a bill. So that's kind of the worst case scenario. If you still file your postcard, that they'll just say, well, you owe money. So unlike the 990 and the 990EZ, there's very little financial information. Other than you still need to know because you're reporting back on the grant funding, but simply you just have to have gross receipts in order to do the postcard filing. And just a reminder that gross receipts is your profit or your income before expenses. We're not talking net income, we're talking gross receipts. Okay. So we'll go ahead and move on. Okay, so a couple other filing requirements just to keep in mind. So we talked about all the federal filings. In California, you also have the California component to the exempt filing, and that's California Form 199. And no matter what series of the 990 that you file the Form 199. The California only has one form. It's 2 pages long. It's pretty simple to complete. They also have the 199N, which is the California version for the e-postcard filing. And both of those get done electronically through the IRS. There's an IRS website, and then also California has their own website for doing that. If you're a charitable organization, or also referred to as a charitable trust in California, so this applies basically if you're a 501c3, you more than likely fall into this category. You also have an RRF1 filing requirement with the Attorney General's office. You might also hear Registry of Charitable Trust. That all means the same thing. And I just will bring this up to point out that if you are doing an e-postcard filing, once upon a time with the RRF1, if your gross receipts were under 25,000, you didn't have to attach supplemental information to that RRF1. They recently changed their rules, and now no matter what, there is a supplementary schedule that you need to include. So you may have a little bit more record keeping as far as your balance sheet and your profit and loss for purposes of this form that you don't necessarily need on that postcard filing. So just kind of keep that in mind. All right, so we'll move. Okay, so we've kind of talked very briefly. I know it's a lot of information, but very briefly for the exempt organization. So I just wanted to also address a few issues or concerns if you were an individual filer. So if you're an individual or a for-profit entity, you'll have different, tax filing requirements. If you are a sole proprietor, and that means it's just you don't have a business, you don't have an LLC or an S corp formed. If you receive grant funding from this, then you're going to file a Schedule C. And you may already have been doing this, and you'll just add that income to it. If this is a different business entity or type than what you were previously doing, you may have a new Schedule C that you're going to, have on your 1040. If you're a limited liability company, depending on how you were formed, you potentially will have a partnership filing requirement. And if you're a single member LLC, there is a small California informational return that gets filed, but essentially you're still filing a Schedule C. And as a corporation, potentially as an S Corp, if you have an S election in place, and a C Corp. Regardless of what, how you might fall in this category, the difference is no matter where you are here, this is going to be taxable income. So just keep that in mind. This is unlike an exempt organization. This is taxable income for which you will be receiving a 1099 for that. So we'll go ahead and move forward. So I just wanted to address briefly as is, your accounting method and how that kind of falls into the grant cycle. So there's two main, there are a few others, but the two main options for your accounting is an accrual or a cash basis. Now, as an individual and businesses, you're more than likely on a cash basis of accounting. As an exempt organization, potentially you're doing accrual basis accounting. And then again, depending on which option you choose will determine how you're going to report your grant rewards. It also will make a difference if you're a fiscal year filer versus a calendar year filer. So just as a reminder, and I'm sure you guys have already seen this several times, but the grant cycle is May 1st or May 1 of 2023 to May 1st of 2024. So that's on a fiscal period. So on a cash basis, if you get the money on May 1st, you just report the income at that time and then your expenses, as you spend the money. On an accrual basis, you have to match your income with expenses. So even though you get the money, if it's not, if you don't expend it by December 31st, you potentially will have additional income that you'll report in 2 years versus just 1 year. So just kind of keep that in mind as you're keeping track of your records. And then when it comes time to filing, that you are making that separation. All right, so we'll go ahead and move on. Okay. So the 1099 NEC. So anyone who's, if you have a Schedule C or you have a business and you've issued these, you would have noticed that in the last couple of years, the IRS made a change. We always used to see a 1099 miscellaneous, and now the IRS in the last few years, we've seen what we call a 1099 NEC, which stands for non-employee compensation. So this is how the IRS's way of segregating, okay, we know that this is self-employment income versus anything else that gets reported on a 1099 miscellaneous. So I kind of did this in a couple examples. And one is what happens if I'm the person, I received the grant funding, but now I'm paying another artist. And whether you are an exempt organization or you're, a sole proprietor, you still have that filing requirement. So if you pay an artist more than $600 on a calendar year basis, you're going to be required to file that 1099 NEC for them. Now, one thing I would recommend is, any good business practice is get the W-9 before any payments are made, because it's a little hard sometimes after the fact at the year end when you're trying to do that and someone's not responsive and you're like, well, now what do I do? So always get that W-9 up front. And I do have an example that we'll go over, and that there's a resource for that to be able to access that. So just kind of keep that in mind. If for some reason your artists are employees, to just keep in mind, that there will be on a W-2 instead of that 1099. And then the other thing is, if you have not, I guess, previously received anything like this, and this is going to be new to you, something to keep in mind that this is considered self-employment income, which means that you will be subject to self-employment taxes. And so if you're not familiar with that, something that, if you have a tax preparer, or maybe you've done it yourself before, maybe you need a little help or guidance in that area, that potentially, making some quarterly estimated tax payments or something like that may be something that you need to start doing. So again, if you're not familiar, I'm available for questions on that, or, you might know somebody, or go to your tax preparer and say, hey, this is new and going to be happening. It's always better to tell them ahead of time and then after the fact and try and, deal with the consequences then. All right, so we'll move on to the next one. Okay, so I provided just so I know that in doing your budgets, one of the things that is allowed is your tax preparation fees. So I did put it just kind of these are just some approximates. So if you needed assistance with your e-postcard filings and the RF1, it runs about $300. The 990EZ, which is, remembers the short form, anywhere. And again, this is dependent on bookkeeping already being done. So if you need bookkeeping services, then that will, adjust accordingly. But usually the range is somewhere between $600 to $1,000 for the short form. The long version, just because there's a lot more information that has to be put in there, And again, these are just some ranges that I'm giving you between $1,500 and $2,500. If you do an individual with a Schedule C would roughly start around $600. A business return, and that, you know, whether you're partnership, corporation, LLC, usually starts about $1,200. So, and again, just as a reminder, you know, make sure you include that in your budget if you're going to have those. I did want to just kind of bring up, and I know Andrea had asked, if you have a tax preparer already, and maybe this is something new, usually for an exempt organization, you can ask them if they do any pro bono work, or if they're, you know, if there's any assistance. So maybe have that conversation first, you know, as you're putting your budget together, so you know whether or not you need to, you know, account for this, or that gives you extra money to, you know, to spend elsewhere. So again, it's all about communication and having those conversations up front. So there's just kind of some examples of some fees there. And then on the next slide, I just put some links, some helpful links if you were going to try and do this on your own. So I have two under the IRS. The first one is just simply takes you to the IRS website. You can do a search. You can get a lot of information about the life cycle. If you need to change your name, you need to change your address. There's a lot of information there. And they've actually, I would say over the last few years, have really improved their website. And there's a lot of good information there. The second link under IRS takes you directly to the 990NE postcard filing. Unlike the Franchise Tax Board, the IRS requires a login. If anyone has tried to create an account with IRS lately, they now use the idme.gov. So I think even the DMV and all sorts of things use it. So you may have to update your account if you have not done that lately, but it does require a login to be able to do that. Under the Franchise Tax Board, I have two links. The first one is just simply to the charities and nonprofits page. It just kind of gives you information about different filings and access to the forms to California. And then the second link is to do the 199N, which is the postcard filing for California. California doesn't require a login. Anyone can go in as long as you know the EIN number, and you can do the postcard filing. And then lastly, I just put a link to the Department of Justice, which is, again, we've also stated that you might hear it referred to as the Registry of Charitable Trust, and also it's the Attorney General's office. And there's a link to the government, you know, a lot of governance information as far as just operating a nonprofit in California. So there's some information there. And then lastly, I think I've got one more. Oh, I know we're not going to do questions at this point, but I really appreciate your time. There's my contact information. Again, I'll be available during the session if you guys have any questions, but feel free to reach out with me. I usually do an initial consultation that's no cost anyway. So if you want to make that contact, I'm more than happy to help you. So thank you.
Thank you, Charlie. Excellent information. Very much appreciate you. And in case you did not notice, I'm not only managing behind the scenes, but the front of the scenes at the moment today. So I apologize if there were some visuals. I hope we got them fixed early on. Thank you for those of you that were alerting me. And I am continuing to collect your questions that we will answer towards the end of the session. So without further ado, I'd like to go ahead and introduce Edith from Mission Bank, who is going to talk to you about safe banking practices and all the tools you will need to be successful should you become a grantee, but also just really great banking information for every day. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having me, Andrea, and it's really an honor to be here. But like Andrea said, I am Edith. I am a business banker here at Mission Bank. I work closely with Andrea in regards to the current Dance Alliance, the KDA. I just make sure that everything is streamlined for them and making sure, you know, their accounts are safe. That's our #1 priority, but also to streamline the whole process. My goal today is just to give you hopefully some good banking tips, some good information that you can take today, whether it's for the grant or whether it's for your personal banking or organization banking. So with that being said, let's talk about bank and best practices for banking. So with this opportunity that you guys have, and if you guys get granted, it is something to consider if you want to separate a separate account for the purpose of the grant. The reason why is because that way you have a clean record. You avoid commingling. I think that was a big thing, right? I kind of heard you can't use this grant money for personal use. So making sure you're keeping a clean record in regards to the funds for this grant. That's the reason it's an idea to just separate the funds. It also gives you the option to use a debit card, credit card, instead of using cash. That way there's a clean record somewhere on there, a statement that you're able to view back and say, hey, this is what I did with these funds. And then obviously every month you have a statement, right? You're able to go back and say, hey, I spend this on that, collect the receipts, cross-reference everything, make sure you have a clean record of everything. I do want to touch base a little bit in regards to FDIC. I'm not sure if everybody on here knows what that is, but basically what that is, FDIC basically stands for Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. The simplest way I can put it, it protects your funds and your accounts if your bank fails. So a bank like us, for example, we are FDIC secured. Mainly all banks are. I know that, for example, credit unions are a little bit different, but basically what that is, you're insured up to $250 per account, per depository, per account ownership, types per financial institution. So that's very important. It protects your checking accounts, saving accounts, money markets, certificate of deposits, meaning CDs, any monetary instruments, for example, cashier's checks, money orders, and any other financial items issued by the bank. So very important. What else? Account signers. So I know that we have organizations, but we also have individuals on this call. Very important to keep an eye out on who you authorize to have as a user, because initially anybody that you put on there as a signer or as a joint signer has full access, meaning they can withdraw, they can write checks, have access to debit cards. So you want to make sure you trust, or you're sure of who you're putting in your account. For those that have individual accounts, something to think about is also, in case something happens to you, there's things called interest for beneficiaries, POD, which stands on power on death. In case anything happens, you can put somebody as a beneficiary as well. In regards to using the funds, right? We have options to do your debit card, checks, credit card. The biggest advantage of using, I know a lot of people are more gravitate more towards like debit cards because it's the easiest thing, but another option to think about, whether you're an organization or individual, is a credit card, because there's zero liability in most of these credit cards. You don't have to worry about the fraud, right? There's so much fraud going around right now. Every time you shop online, you go pump gas, you have that risk of somebody obtaining your information. And then ultimately that debit card is linked to your funds. So you just have to be precautious about that. With the credit card, I mean, it's something that gives you zero liability. You're protected at all times, and it's not necessarily linked directly to your credit card, which gives you that extra security. What else can I say? Credit card helps you build the credit, whether it's personal or business. It opens opportunities down the road, whether it be for personal wise, like as a auto loan, mortgage, if you're an organization or a business, a commercial building, business lines of credits. Credit card just opens all those opportunities down the road. And then at the same time, if you think about it, you have opportunity to earn points, cash back, travel, all of that. So there's a lot of benefits that come with a credit card if you didn't want to use a debit card. Also trying to refrain from like using checks, because if you use checks, every time you hand out a check or write out a check, you have to remember that your account number, routing number is out there now. So it's easier to compromise. So just try to leverage or minimize fraud. And then another key point that I wanted to just point out, just building a relationship with whatever bank you decide to, institution you decide to move forward, just building that connection, that relationship with your business banker, your bank. That way they understand your needs and understand what you're trying to accomplish, and use them as an advisory consultant kind of role. Long-term relationships also can lead to any future needs down the road. Like as time goes by, if you need other needs, they understand where you're coming from and what you're looking for. Other than that, I think it's pretty straightforward. I hope I at least gave you some points that you can use, like I said, in regards to this grant or just your personal or business in the future, Thank you so much.
Thank you, Edith. Great information being shared with everybody here today. And I cannot express enough the importance of having a relationship with your bank. I can't tell you how many times I've had to call Edith or Glenda, our other representative at the bank, and say, this isn't working, please fix it. And so I'll be honest, it took us 6 or 7 years to really understand the importance of that relationship and having a real person on the other side versus some sort of automated service. So please, whatever bank you are working with, develop a relationship with a real person there who absolutely will hold your hand through any financial processes that you need help with. And Edith, thank you so much for being there for me all the time. So with that said, we're going to hop on over into some of these wonderful questions that are coming into the chat. Again, keep loading them in. I am moderating them on your behalf. I will be sending these questions over to our experts, and I can also provide some information in the event the experts cannot. So we're going to go dive right into Karina, who is asking, for film sets, it is customary to provide food for the cast and crew during actual filming day. As I understand the stipulations, I cannot count meal provisions in the administrative cost. Is that correct? Danette, do you want to take that or shall I?
My understanding, Andrea, is that it is not acceptable. However, you might have some further information that I did not see in the guidelines, so please.
So Karina, it is off limits to purchase any type of hospitality with the grant funds. Now, I would recommend maybe if you are wanting to offer food and beverage to the people in your cast, maybe there's some in-kind opportunities where you reach out to your local restaurants or caterers that would be willing to provide you with free services on that day. Maybe there's an in-kind trade out where you know that you give them a shout out, a business spotlight, you use their logo to give them thanks. And that is certainly an option. But yes, unfortunately, we don't make the rules. We do have to abide by the state, and hospitality is off limits in terms of the budget. Next question that we have here is from, let's see, Elena asks, we're allowed to charge items for supplies and pay that off, correct? That is correct, Elena. You are able to purchase supplies during the grant cycle. So Danette was really clear that any expenses incurred before May 1 cannot be included in your budget or to be paid off during anything that was purchased before the grant cycle cannot be reimbursed later once the cycle begins. So all expenses have to happen between May 1 of 23 and May 1 of 24. And Anonymous asks, what is the reimbursement timeline? I think I'm looking for a little more clarity on that question. What is the reimbursement timeline? If you can give me a little more clarity, then we're happy to get that answer to you. To Patricia, we also buy food for the artists as we do final rehearsals. These expenses are not allowed. Correct, Patricia. Same response that we had earlier. Unfortunately, hospitality is not able to be included within your grant budget. Elena also wants to know, while we are not allowed to purchase equipment, are we allowed to purchase software that may be used for workshops? Danette, did you want to take this one?
Well, that's a good question. You know, I don't know, Andrea, how to answer that. I would say if it's not already in place, you can rent the software. I don't know if that's a thing that you can do or not, but they definitely say no purchases, no outright purchasing of equipment. So software can be that fine line on whether it's equipment or not. Do you have any other insight on that?
I would jump in and say that this is categorized under information technology. Charlie, you can back me up on this, but information technology are any of those tools that you utilize to make your operations run that are outside of physical equipment. So for example, purchasing a license to QuickBooks. Absolutely, you're gonna need some accounting software, or paying for your MailChimp e-blast system during this period to assist with your advertising. Absolutely, those fees can be incurred. Just kind of making the difference between information technology and actual equipment. Charlie, do you want to back me up on this one a little?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I totally agree. And also, and we look at it kind of from a tax perspective, and those are things we kind of consider dues and subscriptions. So you're not so I would think equipment is something that in terms that you would capitalize, you can't go buy a brand new camera or something like that. But yeah, whatever software that you're gonna need for your accounting or, to run the program, I would say would be, included, under those categories and allowable.
Thank you. Elizabeth asks, can material expenses be included in artist stipends? For example, if an artist is invited to create work for an exhibition, can we fund the production of the work or just the artist's labor? So Elizabeth, just to be clear of this 80-20 split. So the 80% is meant to be spent on the salary for your artist. Think of it as 1 year salary for that artist doing 1 year of work. What the artist does with their 80% once they get paid is at their discretion. That does not necessarily have to be reported. However, when it comes to materials that you need, I would load those into the 20%. Canvases, paints, marketing materials, insurance, paying your CPA, all of those elements can be loaded onto the 20%. So reserve your 80% specifically for paying your artists for the work they're doing. Again, this program is a jobs creator, and the jobs creation is based upon the paying of artists for jobs. And then that 20% will assist you with any of those materials or those supplies that you're going to need to make that exhibition or other type of project work. Anybody else want to chime in on that, Charlie or Danette?
Just to say that I agree. Yeah, I would just, what they do with the money, like I said, once they get it, that's up to them. But if part of your agreement is that you would be supplying stuff, then yeah, put that in your 20% so that it's not being, included with their 80.
Heidi asks, I understand I need to save receipts for tax purposes. Does the grant reporting also require photos of the receipts? So I can share with you, and you probably already noted in the grant guidelines that if you are a grantee, there will be 2 financial check-ins, quarterly check-ins with our team, just to ensure that the money is being properly spent. So Danette, I'm going to let you chime in on maintaining those receipts, and also Charlie as well at the end of this, the importance of keeping those receipts. And are photos of receipts appropriate, or do we need the actual receipts?
Photos are just fine.
Photos are just fine. Thank you. Charlie, did you want to add anything there?
Oh, no, I was going to say photos are probably actually better. We were just having this conversation because it could be 4 years down the road when, let's say if you get audited and a lot of receipts that like the ink rubs off and it doesn't, it's not usable at that point anyway. So a photo lasts longer. So yeah, if you can scan it in and just save a copy, and especially if you're using QuickBooks does have an option that as you go, especially if you're rubbing it off your phone, you take a picture and it uploads and it saves it, as you go. So there's probably other tools out there available as well that will store those for you, so you don't just have a bunch of random photos on your phone of receipts. But yeah, definitely agreed. Electronic is probably better.
Thank you. Patricia mentions you show a category of salaries. However, we as an organization do not have the budget to pay salaries. We pay independent contractor fees for artists. Do we list this as independent contractors on our taxes? It's probably a question for Charlie.
Correct. So we use the term salary, but that doesn't necessarily in terms of the grant, does not necessarily say a W-2 employee. I think in terms of the grant, the salary could also just be an independent contractor. However, for record keeping purposes, yes, you're not going to include these as salaries and wages. You're going to call it outside services, independent contractors, whatever terminology that you have, and treat it, as a separate category for when you do your tax filings. But as for purposes of the budget and for the grant, it's salaries.
Thank you. We have another question. What are the budget parameters once the budget is approved? Can we blend between line items or could we need to request a budget modification? So in the event you do become a grantee, the month of May essentially is going to be used to package up your proposals into firm projects. And with that means there will be a lot of back and forth between your contract signing that will firm up your final budget. So on March 31, by March 31st, you will submit your proposed budget. It's the best you can do with identifying how your expenses are going to be allocated in the 80% and in the 20%. However, if you are funded, there will be a final process where you will submit a final budget. And now I can tell you, for example, when we were awarded the KDA Creative Corps grant, I had asked for a certain amount of money. However, when the awards came down, we were granted less than we had asked, which means it ultimately impacted our final budget. So I had to go back to the drawing board and rework all of our numbers and then resubmit that information to the state for final approval. So again, get as close as you possibly can to your final budget when you submit in your grant application. However, yes, on the other side, if you are awarded, there will be time allotted for modifications on your allocated expenses. From Melody. Melody wants to know, having already paid my business insurance for the year, this will be useful for my project. Can that insurance cost be divided into the following grant months for 2023? Charlie, Danette, maybe this goes back to only expenses incurred during that year, but I'll let you take the floor.
Charlie, I'll let you answer that one.
Yeah, well, I don't have as much knowledge as far as the grant, but being that you paid that no matter what, regardless of the fact that you were doing this additional project, so I would say no. That was kind of a sunk cost that you had to pay regardless. Now, if you have any additional expenses or and a writer or something you have to add that's paid during that time frame, then absolutely. But I would just consider that are already gone and expensed and not part of this.
Thank you. Elena wants to know, is there a base level amount of protection? For example, 1 million for insurance needed during our project. So I can speak to that real quick. If you will likely need to take out an additional policy on your insurance, specifically if you're taking your project on the road or you're in somebody's venue, likely that venue is going to request that you have your own personal insurance that is covered up to a certain amount. But absolutely, you can roll those fees into your budget. So if you know, for example, you are going to be hosting your event at a park, and you are, grabbing that permit from your Parks and Recreation service, they're going to likely ask you for proof of insurance at a certain amount. Now, I don't know what that amount might be at Parks and Rec. It might be different from Parks and Rec versus having an event at a performing arts center versus having an event, out in some sort of other public atmosphere. But yes, the amount that you need based upon the project is going to be kind of expressed based upon the person you're working with or the organization you're working with. Charlie, Danette, do you want to follow up on that?
Yeah, I would just, that's kind of like you can talk to your insurance carrier beforehand, so you kind of have a rough idea, especially if you've never done that before. But yeah, usually it's a temporary insurance policy that you have just for that time frame. So if you're going to have like a 1-day event or 2-day event, if it's ongoing, then those costs may be more significant. But like I said, that's probably something you can just address with your insurance carrier now and say, in the event that I do this, what might that, additional policy cost? And that way you can include that in your budget.
Thank you, Charlie. Patricia is also echoing the earlier question about using apps as expenses that we would need to purchase through the grant period. Yes, if those apps can be identified as information technology that are necessary to support the success of your project, you can load those in specifically under information technology, technology support. Let's see. Kelly has a question. I have a question about the best way to pay artist fees, especially when they are small amounts. I have tried Zelle, Venmo, PayPal, but would like one way for all artists. What is the best practice?
Oh, I'll chime in just because I mean, it's not just for purposes of this, but ultimately this is going to lead to your tax return. And so this is, unless that Zelle is somehow linked to a business account, to me, it's usually ideal to have everything, and just like we heard from the banking, everything run through your checking account, so that at the end of the year, all your activity is there and you know what it is. Sometimes it's hard to remember after the fact, well, what was that Zelle payment, or what was this? So I personally think it's ideal that you run it through your checking, and they can be set up for direct deposit, they can be set up for wire transfer. So if it's still a matter of wanting to do an electronic payment versus a paper check, that can all still be done that way. I mean, that's just how I would choose to treat it, so that your records are all in one place and it's not after the fact. I don't know that there's one Zelle versus Venmo or anything else that's better. This is just my 2 cents, but I think previously, people were doing that because, I can, maybe as an independent contractor, I'll report what I want and not this. But you're going to be, on the up and up and issuing a 1099, and everything will be legitimate. So I don't think there's really any need for that. So, but again, that's just my opinion on the matter.
Edith, any recommendations about using some of these online platforms to pay artists beyond the banking account?
You know what? My recommendation, I mean, to each his own, you have the options to pay however you want to pay. But my suggestion is like an ACH bill pay. I know that you're able to input account number, routing number, so that they can directly get the payment. The only thing with an ACH, sometimes you have to do it a couple of days in advance. Or if you wanted to do it as a wire, it's instant. However, there's like a wire fee. But personally, Zelle or something like that can get confusing. Like I said, there's not like a real way of like, sometimes you can forget. I guess that's the issue with that. So my recommendation would be ACH, wire. You can write a check, but again, we're trying to eliminate or reduce fraud. Once you have that check, that's an option, but you always run into that. You have to keep in mind you have your account number and routing number out there. So ACH and wires is the way to go, I would think.
And Edith, is that the same for an individual? If you just have a checking account, savings account, you can still issue those same payments as an individual?
You can. It's called an electronic transfer, but it is an option as well. You can do it with your account number and routing number. As long as you're able to do that, you're able to do it electronically. But again, it just takes a couple of days to reflect on the other end.
So that's really the relationship with your banker comes in. You call your banker and you say, please help me with this process, correct?
Yes, and they will help you for sure. Absolutely.
Thanks, Edith.
And I'm sorry, Andrew, I have one other thing to say about Zelle and Venmo. During my research of those, you are not protected. So if you should actually send your funds to somebody that you owe money to and they don't receive it, and somebody else in the internet world receives that money, you don't get it back. So you have to keep in mind that it's not protected. Thank you.
That is true. It is not protected.
Oh, Edith, I think you muted yourself. Start over.
Just kidding. Apologies. No, I was just saying that is very, very true. When you use these Zelle, PayPal, it's something that you sign up for, and it's like it's somewhere on the agreement. And every time you send, it does tell you like these funds are not, you can't get it back. There's no way of getting it back.
Sound advice. Thank you so much. Karina wants to know, I'm in the process of developing an LLC for myself as a freelance filmmaker. Will utilizing the LLC disqualify me? So Karina, you've likely applied as an individual artist. If you have, forgive me, but is the LLC in a nonprofit realm, or is the LLC you as a sole proprietor? Is that where I'm getting? Charlie, I see you nodding your head, correct? You want to come in on this one?
Yeah, so just to clarify, for an LLC can have multiple members. So as long as this is what we call a single member LLC, meaning it's still her as an individual, it's just that she's having limited liability for herself, but essentially the money's coming to her. So, and that would be, I guess, a question towards you is if she just needs to revamp and say it's, whatever the name of her LLC is, and just show, the formation documents that it's just her and there's not an actual other person that's part of this LLC. So essentially, it's still the same thing, but I would just clarify that it's still just her and there's not another member in there.
Thank you, Charlie. Excellent information. Yes, Karina. So if that LLC is developed before, March 31, which is when the grant applications are due, we can definitely get that information updated. But if you'll just kind of clue us along as you move through your process, we really appreciate that. Elena wants to know, what if when preparing your budget for the project, actual costs are different? For example, paying of insurance, you plan on it being $1,500, but actual totals are $1,559. What happens to your budget if you are over, and what happens to your budget if you spend less? So Elena, this harkens back to the conversation that we were having with the budget that you submit by March 31 is as close as you possibly can be to those dollar amounts. However, if you are funded, you will have some time to rework your numbers to ensure that you are meeting that allocation that you are given. So, if you're over by $9 here, you're under by $10 here, either way, you have a set amount that is granted to you. You have to make those numbers work. There is no issuing more money at the end. You are given, an amount, and you have to make those numbers work within that budget, within those budget line items. Charlie, Danette, or Edith, anybody want to add to that?
I was just going to say, working with nonprofits, this happens all the time. A budget is a budget. It's not a crystal ball into the future. Otherwise, it would be your actuals. So, and I think just what's important is you have to have that 80-20 split. And so, obviously you can keep track of, of your 80, that's pretty easy. But under the 20, a lot of times, and depending on what the parameters of the grant are, it's as long as it's an allowable expense, and you don't, obviously if you go over, that's your own money, to pay those costs. You're still responsible for those costs to your vendors. But, if your insurance went over by $9, but your IT is, under, it all kind of comes out the same, as long as I would imagine your expenses are allowable and, still within that 20%, and you're not taking away from the 80, to cover that extra, allotment. But I think kind of what people are trying to ask is, are they going, every time that changes, and if that happens, do they have to keep resubmitting for some type of change? Or I think that's kind of what they're wanting to know, is what happens in that instance. What do they need to do to report that?
That is where those quarterly financial reports come in. So if you are granted, then there will be a check-in. And forgive me, I don't have the dates in front of me, but I believe there is we have the interim report, of course, in October of 23. We have the final report in June of 24. And in the middle of those are 2 quarterly financial check-ins as well. That's where you can let us know, hey, this is kind of getting kind of wonky. What are the suggestions here to rework some of our numbers? But again, transparency is key and communication is key. We are here to assist you all the way to the end of December 31st, 2024, if you are a grantee. Danette, did you want to add anything?
No, you covered that. Thank you very much.
Charlie, this one might go to you. Kelly wants to know, can you talk about yearly registration with the Department of Justice?
Yes. So I'll kind of broaden it a little bit. So everyone's, as a nonprofit organization, you're aware that you have an IRS filing and your California, your FTB, informational filings. But there's also 2 other filings that potentially that you have. One is with the Secretary of State, because again, you organize as a corporation first, and then you separately, applied for exempt status. So this gets missed a lot, and that's your statement of informational filing, which has a biannual filing requirement. So I don't know if you can see, but you usually get a postcard about this big that gets lost. So I always tell people, set yourself a calendar reminder. They usually give you a 6-month window of when you can start filing it. And it's super critical and super crucial that you get these filed on time, because that one little late filing, besides a $250 fee that you're going to get, the franchise tax board will actually revoke your exempt status over it, and you have to reapply all over again. So that's one hand of it. The filing with the Attorney General's office, which is the Registry of Charitable Trusts. So you have your initial application to get on the list. And then once you're there, you have an annual filing, just like you do with the IRS and the Franchise Tax Board. You don't have to apply for extension. So if you extend your federal return, it's just assumed to be automatic with the Attorney General's office. And so whenever you do all your filings, you submit the RRF1. For those of you that are familiar with this and already have an organization, you might have noticed that, and if you, especially if you self-file, that the Attorney General's office has been sending out little postcards to where they have their own online filing mechanism on their website. So they usually give you a little bit of reminder about that. It doesn't have to be done that way. And if you use an accountant or a CPA, they just do that filing for you. So it should be included. So if you don't currently have one, but you're looking at someone who's going to file for you, just make sure you ask that question to make sure you know this includes my federal, my state, as well as that RRF1 filing that I have to do. But that's done on an annual basis every year.
Thank you, Charlie. And I just wanted to note that Rob Noriega, the KDA Creative Corps Legal Counsel, showed you quite a bit of that information in webinar number 4, and that should be going live on the KDA Creative Corps resource webpage by end of day today. So feel free to access that webinar for more of that legal information to back up what Charlie is also saying. We've got a few more questions coming in. Let's see, Elena wants to know, is Edith talking about KDA providing the funding through a credit card or debit card, or just use the funds those way to keep track? So I can tell you from the KDA perspective, if you are granted, we are likely opting for ACH transfers for the exact reason that Edith has described, just to prevent any type of fraud. In the event that there is not a digital transfer available to you as a grantee, we will be issuing checks. So that is how you will receive the funding through KDA. However, Edith, if you want to talk about tracking your finances via credit and debit cards, that would be great.
Yes, so it is an option. I mean, the debit card obviously is linked to your account. So everything that's routed through the debit card is going to reflect on your statement through the account. I was just referring as a second, or if you wanted to go and be extra cautious, to use as a credit card, but that's separate from your checking account. That is not linked. You can have it linked like for overdraft protection or something like that, but it's not linked directly to the account itself. It's just another way to protect yourself, since it's not every time you use the credit card, it's not linked to your account, meaning if fraud occurs or any discrepancy or anything like that, there's that zero liability, right? Because it's not linked to the checking account itself, if that makes sense. Hopefully that clears that up. But again, it's separate. It's not the same thing.
Thank you, Edith. Lauren wants to know, I plan to pay multiple artists to run workshops and demonstrations. What is the best form of payment to paying an artist that is participating in your project if it is less than $600? I'd like to use a credit card whenever possible. Is it possible to pay through a credit card? Danette, Edith, Charlie, recommendations here?
This is Edith. If that person accepts credit card as a method of payment, but I don't think that would be the case, because they would have to have like a merchant processing to be able to accept that. So I think that would have to be done through like ACH or wires or direct deposit or a check, unless that person accepts it and has a way to process it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I was just going to add, like, if they, a lot of them, you know, if this is their course of business and they might have a Square reader that they can run a credit card, and they may not choose to do that because they then get charged like a processing fee that, you know, for whatever that is. And so they may just, you know, want the full amount, but that's just, you know, probably a conversation you'd have to have with that individual artist, whether or not they accept that. My guess is that most of them don't have that capability and are just going to want either the ACH transfer, you know, or the check, so they're not paying those credit card fees.
Danette, do you have any follow-up there on issuing payment to individuals via the grant?
You know, I understand that the credit card seems to be, are you confusing the credit card with a debit card? But you still have to make that distinction on how they can receive it. Some of these, if you're under the $600, it might be the Venmo if you know them personally. But again, you know, I hate recommending that because you cannot get that money back. Thank you.
Thank you. Anonymous wants to know, are we reimbursed monthly or at the end of the cycle? No, you will receive the check in May. Then you spend it. So that is how that process will work. There will be no reimbursements. You will not be submitting for reimbursements based upon your expenses. You will receive the money upfront, and then you will expend that money by December 31 of 2024. Lauren wants to know, if I bring an out-of-state artist in for an exhibition, can I pay a stipend that the artist then uses for travel expenses, or is an out-of-state artist off limits? Totally off limits, Lauren. Unfortunately, there is no out-of-state payments. This is California taxpayer money that is to be spent on Californians. Unfortunately, we are not able to approve expenses outside of California or any type of international sphere as well. Anonymous wants to know, if you go over the admin cost for supplies, for example, can I use my yearly salary to buy some? Again, this is at your discretion. So 80% is being used to pay artist salaries. What that artist does with their salary is absolutely up to you. That does not have to be reported. Patricia wants to know, because of AB 5 laws, must artists show proof of business license for this grant? No, you do not. However, that is an excellent question for our HR team. And I do believe Juanita addressed this in webinar number 4, which you can access later today when the recording is available. And if you have a business associated with yourself as an individual artist, then that's fine. However, we also recognize there may be individual artists that are granted awards that have no business affiliations at all. And that's where Charlie's coming in, talking about the sole proprietorship. Charlie, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, that's not a requirement otherwise to do business. There may be reasons why you have a business license, but I can tell you in Kern County specifically, the business license is mainly required when you set up an LLC or something like that, and it's not under your personal name. That's the whole concept behind getting a business license, is so that within the county, they have an individual that they can reach out and contact in the event that something happens. So most sole proprietors are not going to have a business license. Now, they may have one for other reasons that they, based on the type of business that they do. But since that's not a requirement there, and just following up on what you said for purposes of the grant, that's not something that you need to request, in order to do business with them and have them on as an artist.
Two simultaneous questions. If we don't end up spending the full grant, what happens to the money? Well, you need to spend the full grant. There is no saving the money at the end. When you go through your contract signing, you do indicate that you will expend all funds by December 2024. There is no holding on to the money past the grant cycle. It must all be spent. So, and I keep saying December 31st because that is the end of the calendar year. I do recognize that the grant cycle for the awardees is May 1 of 24. But we also recognize that you might have some, final legwork that you have to do, towards the end of the grant, just ensuring that that money is all spent on the reasons you said it would be spent. That is a contractual detail. And that is, stating that we will do it and there will be no money left over. Charlie or Danette or Edith, if you want to say anything there.
No, so it's pretty easy to spend money, folks. Come on now.
Yeah, I was just gonna echo on that, that there's plenty amount of time. And if you're, and I would imagine that if you're running into some type of issue that, you know, even the best laid out plans, sometimes things happen. And so as Andrea's mentioned over and over again, communication is key. So if your project is running into an issue, then that's, you know, something that, you know, on a one, you know, case by case basis is just gonna have to be dealt with. But in general, you know, like Danette said, you know, you spend the money. Everything's expensive. It shouldn't be too hard.
Thanks, guys. Lauren wants to know specifically about the 80%. If it's number one, I'm assuming, Lauren, you are applying as an individual artist, that 80% is to be spent on her as her salary. Number one question, yes, pay yourself for your project. This is a jobs creator. This is an opportunity to receive salary for a project utilizing the arts to improve the quality of life for Californians living in the Central Valley region. However, if you are also planning to pay other artists, yes, that does need to load into that 80% as well. So I was noting a couple of webinars ago that there may be instances where the artists are not working in the entire year. You might have an artist only working for 3 to 4 months of your project because that's the only time that their service are needed. So that might only shake out to 15% of that 80%. But yes, anytime you are paying an artist for art specific jobs, they need to land in that 80%. So if you're an individual artist, it's kind of up to you about how generous you want to be with the other artists you're folding into your project and how you're going to pay them. But again, one of the metrics that we are measuring is how many jobs were created through the KDA Creative Corps and ultimately through the California Creative Corps. We want to show the governor at the end of 2 years that we were able to produce and create a significant number of jobs within this project. I hope that helps to answer your question, Lauren. Sharon wants to know, are all exempt organizations required to register with the AG?
No. So that is the short answer. And so some, if you got a notice or something from the Attorney General's office, they may say, hey, it looks like you haven't registered. So they may determine that you're just exempt from registering to begin with. But again, the whole purpose is for charitable trust. So that typically applies to all your 501c3. So if you're like a social organization, a 501c6, a political organization, that's not what they're monitoring. The Attorney's General's office is monitoring those charitable trusts that are for the benefit of the public. So again, that usually applies to all your 501c3s. And I will say, because I see all the time where people are good, oh, I organized, here's my corp, I did my federal exempt application, I did my state, and they have no idea what the Attorney General's office is, and they never registered to begin with. So if you have not done that and you're unsure, you know, maybe if you have a tax preparer, talk to them. I'm more than happy to help you. If you have a question, we can look into that. They have a search option, so you can actually search by an organization name or their EIN number or their corp number if you have it, and you can see if you're already on their radar. And if you haven't registered, then you know it's kind of, you know, no harm, no foul at this point, but probably, you know, get yourself registered and then start doing those filings.
This might be a specific question for Edith. Edith, Anonymous wants to know, if I'm a freelancer and just have a DBA, but I have a business banking account, can I put funds in that account?
I believe so. If that's where you're going to operate from, the idea is that you're going to separate the funds. So if the idea is that you want to have an account, so you just have to keep that in mind, that everything that you run through that account is for the purpose of the grant. If you're going to feel like you're going to commingle and have other projects or other things that are not pertaining to the grant, then my suggestion and recommendation would be to separate it. But you're more than welcome to. Hopefully that answers the question.
I wholeheartedly agree. You don't want different expenses commingling with each other. Track it to the dollar amount so there are no questions asked at the end of the process. Elena wants to know, for an individual artist, since the project spans 2 years, since the money is in the first year, but you're liable for the second year. So your grant cycle is May 1 to May 1 of 23. Now, Charlie was talking about fiscal year versus calendar year and how maybe that is reported, but yes, all money expended during that 1 year, you are liable for the expenses of all of those dollars. Charlie, do you want to reiterate what you were talking about, calendar versus fiscal, and how the money kind of crosses?
Yeah, so I think we got two different concepts. One, we're saying the grant cycle, and that's just a reporting period that you as the awardee are going to be responsible back to KDA, as far as, you're reporting back. Now, separately from that, you have tax filing requirements. And again, if you're an individual, you're a calendar year filer. So what that means is you get the money on May 1st, that's income that year. Now, how you report, you may not have expended all the money by December 31st of 2023. So you may have more income, your net income may be higher in 23. And then in the following year, you're going to have, expenses without the income. And that's just the nature of cash basis accounting, the way it's going to happen. So that will apply to, to individuals and most businesses. And as an exempt organization, the same thing, not that you're paying tax, but for presentation purposes, it might be a little, lopsided, based on the cash basis. How that differentiates is if you are on an accrual basis, you're going to match your income with expenses, which means, yes, you get the money on May 1st, but you're only going to match that, it's what we call deferred income. So you're only going to match if you spend, let's say, $50,000 in your reporting period, then you're going to accrue 50,000 of that income. So it kind of nets. And then when you go into the next reporting period, when the money's spent, then you match it, the revenue that goes with that. But again, and then on a fiscal year basis, if you're a June 30th year end, it's probably unlikely that from May 1st to June 30th, you spent all that money. So again, it's for presentation wise, you may have a lot of income in one year and then a lot of expenses in the next year. But for most, as an individual, you'll report the income, when you get it.
Patricia wants to know, can I pay an artist who is 16? So just to make clear, all awardees must be 18 years or older. However, that 80% can pay minors. However, there are some certain ramifications that come along with that Juanita, our HR specialist, really dove into during webinar number 4. So I encourage you to watch that recording for sure. Charlie, Danette, Edith, do you have recommendations about paying underage individuals? Minors, I should say.
Yeah, I would just add, the fact that using grant money, is no different than that this is, if you've been paying from any other source of funds, that you just have to follow whatever labor laws are in place. So if it, they probably have to have a work permit or, some other thing. So you would just follow whatever rules that are in place. Having said that, as an individual, if you have a family business, there are different laws that apply to that. So if that's your child, which I don't know how that plays into the grant, if there's any restrictions on that, but that would be the only other, I guess, consideration, that there are some different laws, that do apply under a family business. But if it's an unrelated member outside of your family, you just follow, whatever normal labor laws are in place.
Thank you, Charlie. Did Danette or Edith, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I don't really deal with that type of bookkeeping part of the area. I hire out all my payroll. So Charlie did a wonderful job of the explanation. Thank you, Charlie.
I would say the same. Charlie nailed it. Just make sure you're following the law.
Thank you. Dixie wants to know, if we're paying stipends to youth artists for specific projects, keeping it under $600, can that count towards the 80%, or does it have to be formal employment? So again, webinar number 4, Rob and Juanita really clearly addressed the laws and HR compliance. Please, revert back to that. However, you can build that 80% any way you want. If there is an artist that is being paid, they should likely be loaded into that 80%. However, there are different ways of classifying some artists. For example, you're likely going to be incurring marketing costs, creating websites or creating flyers or creating posters, elements to market and advertise your project to engage your community. A graphic artist might be needed in order to create those materials for you. Yes, they are an artist. Yes, they could load into that 80%, but I see them more important in your marketing realm, which is, or an administrative position where you're paying that individual for a service that's beyond the actual creation of the project. And I mean the actual artistic element of the project, using the arts to enhance the quality of life for Californians. The graphic artist is there more as an admin support role versus the actual creation as an artist within the project. But when it comes to formal employment versus honorariums versus how you're going to be paying this individual, my advice from what I gleaned from our experts last week is make sure you are in compliance with the laws. We don't want anything happening to you at the end, you know, where you're getting zinged for this or that or fined for this or that. Just make sure you're staying in compliance and staying legal with any business operations you are undertaking. Charlie, Danette, Edith, anything there?
Yeah, I was just gonna add, I think maybe there's, based on some of the questions that are coming in, just to clarify, and I think somewhere the $600 is hanging people up. So ignoring the $600 limit right now, when we say artist fees, they can be independent contractors or they can be employees, or in this case, we're talking about a youth stipend, which, you know, in the sense that's still considered an independent contractor because they are not an employee. Now, separately from that, we live in California. California has very strict rules on what is an employee and what is not. So first and foremost, and that's kind of a legal labor law question. So if you have any questions about, does this person, you know, count as an employee or an independent contractor, I would speak with, you know, with some legal counsel on that. Now, separately, once that has been distinguished, you know, the $600 is just a separate thing. If you pay someone who's not an employee over $600, then you have to 1099 them. But you can still have someone under that threshold who doesn't meet the $600 limit, and that just means you don't 1099 them. But as far as your salaries go, you know, whether they're employee or an independent contractor, it's all being lumped in that 80%, and you pay them, you know, kind of how you see fit once you've made that determination that you can classify them this way or that way.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Yes, thank you. A few more questions, about 3 minutes left. When your first project is finished, can you still do something else with the guidelines? You can continue creating something else with the artist, correct? No, the project has to have a clear beginning, middle, and end throughout that 1 year period. So when you submit your grant application, we have to be very clear on your plans for 1 year. You can't sort of wrap up a project midway and start a brand new project for the second half of the year. It has to be a 1 year project with one focus, one goal, one population you're going to be serving, or several. You can't kind of press pause and then start again on something brand new. It has to come to full fruition by the end of your grant cycle. Lauren, can you choose to do cash basis or accrual? Charlie, that's for you.
So the answer is it depends. As an individual, no. As a LLC, yes, depending on certain things, that there may be some reasons why you would want to do that. And when I say it depends, is that it's one of those things where you can't just flip flop back and forth from year to year. So you have to be very conscious, you know, when you're making that decision, that that's what you're going to do. Now, there may be, if you have been cash basis and you have the eligibility to convert to accrual, there may be some repercussions in that first year if you're a tax paying entity. And what I mean by that is perhaps you're, you know, if you have other receivables, and that's what accrual means, is that, you know, we now are looking at accounts receivable, accounts payable, and then potentially this deferred income. So sometimes in that year of conversion, you have some what we call phantom income that you're paying tax on because of the fact that you haven't received the money, but you're reporting it as income, which is a little bit different than deferred income because you got the money, you're just not reporting it necessarily as income in that year. So just keep it, you know, like I said, just make an educated decision if that's what you're going to do, because once you convert to accrual, you know, you're going to have to stay that way for a period of time until it makes sense to potentially swap back. But again, as an individual, you're always a cash basis.
Thank you, Charlie. We have time for 2 more questions. Just to clarify, visiting artists from outside of California selected to work with local artists cannot be supported in the grant funds. Correct, Elizabeth. No grant funds can be used to pay out-of-state individuals or for their travel or any expenses that are associated with individuals that are not Californians. Those monies cannot be used for people outside of our state. Karina, regarding a film project, looks as if it will take to finish beyond May 24. Would submitting a rough cut suffice? Karina, my recommendation to you would be to have the project wrap up within that 1 year. I don't believe that indicating that the project will be wrapped up after the grant cycle will be competitive. So my recommendation to you is to make sure you get it wrapped up by May 1 and that film is serving the people you intend for it to serve, with the intent of improving the lives of Californians living in the lowest quartile of the Healthy Places Index. And finally, Kelly wants to know, hey, Charlie, can we book office hours with you?
Absolutely. Yeah, you have my contact and you can always reach out to Andrea. She can get you in touch with me if need be, but I'm happy to help. So not a problem.
And we're going to sneak in one more question here. And I think it's a great question that has not been addressed, or it hasn't been a little bit, but just to be cleared, will we be taxed on a grant if granted?
So the answer is, it depends. Whoever is receiving the grant is normally pays taxes. So that means if you're an individual, if you have an LLC, if you are a for-profit entity, yes, it is taxable income. If you are a nonprofit organization, then it's like any other income you get, you do not pay tax on that.
Thank you. With that, we are at time. We've had so many wonderful questions come in. I hope this has informed your finance process a little bit more, not only for the KDA Creative Corps grant, but beyond into your, general operating, business operating processes and policies. So it is my pleasure to thank Charlie and Edith and Danette for your time today. Equally, I would like to thank Stephanie. Thank you so much for lending your ASL services to us all. We look forward to wrapping up this final session with you, or our final webinar with you on Friday. It is an Ignite session. I will be joined by my colleague, Whitney Pasquale, who is the KDA program coordinator, answering any final questions that you might have, helping you to ignite some more creativity as you move into your grant writing. And I also want to acknowledge, we've had so many questions come in. When will I receive access into the grant portal? Well, as you might imagine, the final 24 hours of the LOI submission, we had an influx of applications. And part of our role in this process is ensuring that we're connecting with each of you and giving you feedback on your LOI, so that when you move into the grant writing process, you have a few more tools in your tool belt, if you will, to create those persuasive and competitive applications. So we are working as fast as we can to get through them. The good news is you already have the grant questions in the grant guidelines. So you can start working on your questions in your word processing software now. But please know we're working as fast as we can. We have a goal of trying to get through all of them by the end of the week, but please do not deter that from getting you started on your actual grant application writing. That is available to you now. But please know we are here for you. Please let those questions come in. We might be a little slow to get back to you as in comparison to where we were a couple of weeks ago, but we are working as fast as we can to move through this process while also giving you all the support you need. I also have office hours available to you throughout the month of March. If you need some one-on-one time, those are 15-minute sessions. You can sign up with those on our Meet the Team page, and you can click the button and sign up for a webinar. So Charlie, Edith, Danette, and Stephanie, thank you for your time today. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful day, and hopefully we'll see you on Friday. Bye-bye.